This phrase was afterward repeated to Mr. Faure, the examining magistrate. But no one ever knew exactly what passed between the two brothers at this interview. The servants declared that this was not their first quarrel. Their voices penetrated the wall, and it was always an actress called Christine Daaé that was in question. At breakfast, the early morning breakfast, which the Count took in his study, Philippe sent for his brother. Raoul arrived silent and gloomy. The scene was a very short one. Philippe handed his brother a copy of the Epoque and said, "Read that." The Viscount read, "The latest news in the Faubourg is that there is a promise of marriage between Miss Christine Daaé, the opera singer, and Mr. le Vicomte Raoul de Chagny. If the gossips are to be credited, Count Philippe has sworn that, for the first time on record, the Chagnys shall not keep their promise. But, as love is all-powerful, at the operas, and even more than elsewhere, we wonder how Count Philippe intends to prevent the Viscount, his brother, from leading the new Margarita to the altar. The two brothers are said to adore each other, but the Count is curiously mistaken if he imagines that brotherly love will triumph over love pure and simple. You see, Raoul," said the Count, "you are making us ridiculous. That little girl has turned your head with her ghost stories." The Viscount had evidently repeated Christine's narrative to his brother, during the night. All that he now said was, "Goodbye, Philippe. Have you quite made up your mind? You are going tonight? With her?" "No," reply. "Surely you will not do anything so foolish? I shall know how to prevent you." "Goodbye, Philippe," said the Viscount again and left the room. This scene was described to the examining magistrate by the Count himself, who did not see Raoul again until that evening, at the opera, a few minutes before Christine's disappearance. Raoul, in fact, devoted the whole day to his preparations for the flight. The horses, the carriage, the coachman, the provisions, the luggage, the money required for the journey, the road to be taken. He had resolved not to go by train, so as to throw the ghost off the scent. All this had to be settled and provided for, and it occupied him until 9 o'clock at night. At 9 o'clock, a sort of travelling barouche with the curtains of its windows close down, took its place in the rank on the rotunda side. It was drawn by two powerful horses driven by a coachman whose face was almost concealed in the long folds of a muffler. In front of this travelling carriage were 3 brooms, belonging respectively to Carlotta, who had suddenly returned to Paris, to Cirelli and, at the head of the rank, to Comte Philippe de Chagny. No one left the barouche. The coachman remained on his box, and the 3 other coachmen remained on theirs. A shadow in a long black cloak and a soft black felt hat passed along the pavement between the rotunda and the carriages, examined the barouche carefully, went up to the horses and the coachman and then moved away without saying a word. The magistrate afterward believed that this shadow was that of the Vicomte Raoul de Chagny, but I do not agree, seeing that that evening, as every evening, the Vicomte de Chagny was wearing a tall hat, which hat, besides, was subsequently found. I am more inclined to think that the shadow was that of the ghost, who knew all about the whole affair, as the reader will soon perceive. They were giving Faust, as it happened, before a splendid house. The Faubourg was magnificently represented, and the paragraph in that morning's Epoque had already produced its effect, for all eyes were turned to the box in which Count Philippe sat alone, apparently in a very indifferent and careless frame of mind. The feminine element in the brilliant audience seemed curiously puzzled, and the Viscount's absence gave rise to any amount of whispering behind the fans. Christine Daaé met with a rather cold reception. That special audience could not forgive her for aiming so high. The singer noticed this unfavorable attitude of a portion of the house and was confused by it. The regular frequenters of the opera, who pretended to know the truth about the Viscount's love story, exchanged significant smiles at certain passages in Margarita's part, and they made a show of turning and looking at Philippe de Chagny's box when Christine sang. I wish I could but know who was he that addressed me. If he was noble, or, at least, what his name is. The Count sat with his chin on his hand and seemed to pay no attention to these manifestations. He kept his eyes fixed on the stage, but his thoughts appeared to be far away. Christine lost her self-assurance more and more. She trembled. She felt on the verge of a breakdown. Carolus Fonta wondered if she was ill, if she could keep the stage until the end of the garden act. In the front of the house, people remembered the catastrophe that had befallen Carlotta at the end of that act and the historic coac, which had momentarily interrupted her career in Paris. Just then, Carlotta made her entrance in a box facing the stage, a sensational entrance. Poor Christine raised her eyes upon this fresh subject of excitement. She recognized her rival. She thought she saw a sneer on her lips. That saved her. She forgot everything, in order to triumph once more. From that moment the prima donna sang with all her heart and soul. She tried to surpass all that she had done till then, and she succeeded. In the last act, when she began the invocation to the angels, she made all the members of the audience feel as though they too had wings. In the center of the amphitheater a man stood up and remained standing, facing the singer. It was Raoul. Holy angel, in heaven blessed. And Christine, her arms outstretched, her throat filled with music, the glory of her hair falling over her bare shoulders, uttered the divine cry. My spirit longs with thee to rest. It was at that moment that the stage was suddenly plunged in darkness. It happened so quickly that the spectators hardly had time to utter a sound of stupefaction, for the gas at once lit up the stage again. But Christine Daaé was no longer there. What had become of her? What was that miracle? All exchanged glances without understanding, and the excitement at once reached its height. Nor was the tension any less great on the stage itself. Men rushed from the wings to the spot where Christine had been singing that very instant. The performance was interrupted amid the greatest disorder. Where had Christine gone? What witchcraft had snatched her, away before the eyes of thousands of enthusiastic onlookers and from the arms of Carolus Fonta himself? It was as though the angels had really carried her up to rest. Raoul, still standing up in the amphitheater, had uttered a cry. Count Philippe had sprung to his feet in his box. People looked at the stage, at the Count, at Raoul, and wondered if this curious event was connected in any way with the paragraph in that morning's paper. But Raoul hurriedly left his seat, the Count disappeared from his box, and, while the curtain was lowered, the subscribers rushed to the door that led behind the scenes. The rest of the audience waited amid an indescribable hubbub. Everyone spoke at once. Everyone tried to suggest an explanation of the extraordinary incident. At last, the curtain rose slowly and Carolus Fonta stepped to the conductor's desk and, in a sad and serious voice, said, "Ladies and gentlemen, an unprecedented event has taken place and thrown us into a state of the greatest alarm. Our sister artist, Christine Daaé, has disappeared before our eyes and nobody can tell us how." Chapter 14: The singular attitude of a safety pin. Behind the curtain, there was an indescribable crowd. Artists, scene shifters, dancers, supers, choristers, subscribers were all asking questions, shouting and hustling one another. What became of her? She's run away. With the Vicomte de Chagny, of course. No, with the Count. Ah, here's Carlotta. Carlotta did the trick. No, it was the ghost. And a few laughed, especially as a careful examination of the trapdoors and boards had put the idea of an accident out of the question. Amid this noisy throng, 3 men stood talking in a low voice and with despairing gestures. They were Gabriel, the chorus master, Mercier, the acting manager, and Remy, the secretary. They retired to a corner of the lobby by which the stage communicates with the wide passage leading to the foyer of the ballet. Here they stood and argued behind some enormous properties. "I knocked at the door," said Remy. "They did not answer. Perhaps they are not in the office. In any case, it's impossible to find out, for they took the keys with them." They were obviously the managers, who had given orders, during the last entr'acte, that they were not to be disturbed on any pretext whatever. They were not in to anybody. "All the same," exclaimed Gabriel, "a singer isn't run away with, from the middle of the stage, every day." "Did you shout that to them?" asked Mercier, impatiently. "I'll go back again," said Remy, and disappeared at a run. Thereupon the stage manager arrived. "Well, M. Mercier, are you coming? What are you two doing here?" "You're wanted, Mr. Acting Manager." "I refuse to know or to do anything before the commissary arrives," declared Mercier. "I have sent for Mefroid. We shall see when he comes. And I tell you that you ought to go down to the organ at once. Not before the commissary comes. I've been down to the organ myself already." "Ah, and what did you see?" "Well, I saw nobody." "Do you hear? Nobody. What do you want me to do down there for?" "You're right," said the stage manager, frantically pushing his hands through his rebellious hair. "You're right, but there might be someone at the organ who could tell us how the stage came to be suddenly darkened. Now Mauclair is nowhere to be found. Do you understand that? Mauclair was the gas man, who dispensed day and night at will on the stage of the opera. Mauclair is not to be found," repeated Mercier, taken aback. "Well, what about his assistants?" "There's no Mauclair and no assistants. No one at the lights, I tell you." "You can imagine," roared the stage manager, that little girl must have been carried off by somebody else. She didn't run away by herself." It was a calculated stroke and we have to find out about it. And what are the managers doing all this time? I gave orders that no one was to go down to the lights and I posted a fireman in front of the gasman's box beside the organ. Wasn't that right? Yes, yes, quite right. Quite right. And now let's wait for the commissary. The stage manager walked away, shrugging his shoulders, fuming, muttering insults at those milksops who remained quietly squatting in a corner while the whole theatre was topsy-turvy. Gabriel and Mercia were not so quiet as all that. Only they had received an order that paralyzed them. The managers were not to be disturbed on any account. Remy had violated that order and met with no success. At that moment he returned from his new expedition, wearing a curiously startled air. "Well, have you seen them?" asked Mercia. Moncharmin opened the door at last. His eyes were starting out of his head. "I thought he meant to strike me. I could not get a word in, and what do you think he shouted at me? 'Have you a safety pin?' No. Well, then, clear out." I tried to tell him that an unheard of thing had happened on the stage, but he roared, "A safety pin! Give me a safety pin at once." A boy heard him. He was bellowing like a bull, ran up with a safety pin and gave it to him. Whereupon Moncharmin slammed the door in my face, and there you are. And couldn't you have said, "Christine Daaé? I should like to have seen you in my place." He was foaming at the mouth. He thought of nothing but his safety pin. I believe, if they hadn't brought him one on the spot, he would have fallen down in a fit. Oh, all this isn't natural, and our managers are going mad. Besides, it can't go on like this. I'm not used to being treated in that fashion. Suddenly Gabriel whispered. "It's another trick of OG's." Remy gave a grin, Mercia a sigh and seemed about to speak, but, meeting Gabriel's eye, said nothing. However, Mercia felt his responsibility increased as the minutes passed without the managers appearing, and, at last, he could stand it no longer. "Look here, I'll go and hunt them out myself." Gabriel, turning very gloomy and serious, stopped him. "Be careful what you're doing, Mercia. If they're staying in their office, it's probably because they have to. OG has more than one trick in his bag." But Mercia shook his head. "That's their lookout. I'm going. If people had listened to me, the police would have known everything long ago." And he went. "What's everything?" asked Remy. "What was there to tell the police?" "Why don't you answer, Gabriel?" "Ah, so you know something. Well, you would do better to tell me, too, if you don't want me to shout out that you are all going mad." "Yes, that's what you are, mad." Gabriel put on a stupid look and pretended not to understand the private secretary's unseemly outburst. "What, something, am I supposed to know?" he said. "I don't know what you mean." Remy began to lose his temper. This evening, Richard and Moncharmin were behaving like lunatics, here, between the acts. "I never noticed it," growled Gabriel, very much annoyed. "Then you're the only one. Do you think that I didn't see them? And that M. Parabise, the manager of the Credit Central, noticed nothing? And that M. de la Borderie, the ambassador, has no eyes to see with? Why, all the subscribers were pointing at our managers." "But what were our managers doing?" asked Gabriel, putting on his most innocent air. "What were they doing? You know better than anyone what they were doing. You were there, and you were watching them, you and Mercia. And you were the only two who didn't laugh." "I don't understand."